Hello and welcome to this video. Welcome to this versus video between the mighty Spyderco Sages. The Spyderco Sage 1 and the Spyderco Sage 2. From the outset you can see the differences. If you've watched my reviews you have a pretty good understanding of the sizes. They're pretty much the same size. The weights, there's only a little bit of a difference, but the main differences are the locking mechanisms and the handle materials. So, in my review of the Sage 1, I think I mentioned that the locking mechanism is basically the Walker liner lock, where there's a part of the liner moves across upon deployment of the blade and locks the blade into place. It's a decent lock. Many knives have that kind of lock these days, so it's tried and tested. It's not too much of a difficult lock to get right, and I don't think it costs too much either, because there's a lot of cheap knives that have that lock as well. The Sage 2 on the other hand has this RIL lock, which is a Reeves integral lock or integrated lock, and that is basically a frame lock. So part of the knife's handle's frame is the lock. It's a bar that moves across when the blade is deployed and locks the blade into place. Some people will argue that the frame lock is stronger than the liner lock. Some people will argue that it's weaker. Some people will argue that if you keep moving that part of the handle scale over and over again, that will lead to the frame part of the lock actually over travelling too far, so you'll get less of a lockup the more you keep pushing that over. They both have their strong points and their weaknesses. I've written a little list, as always I do, of the talking points of this versus video. So we'll go through them. So deployment wise, the Sage 1. If you've got a Sage 1, you know it can be deployed very quickly, and it's super smooth. It's that smooth. I have to say super twice. Very smooth. One of the smoothest knives I have. It has something to do with those bronze phosphor washings in there, but it's really smooth to open and deploy, and then once it's deployed it's a pleasure to use. The Sage 2 on the other hand, it's a little bit grittier, and I have lubed it up, and it does have the bronze phosphor washings in there as well, but it is slightly slower. The reason being is because the frame lock, the nature of the frame lock, how thick it is and how much more pressure is being placed on the blade than the liner lock, and that affects the deployment speed. Having said that, you can still flick it out very quickly. So on that point I'd probably have to give it to the Sage 1. The lock. Everybody has their preferences of locks. The liner lock and the frame lock, or the RIL lock. Well, it's got lock in RIL, hasn't it? But you get my point, in that that's really personal preference. I prefer a frame lock. I just do. I think I do because one of the reasons is because there's no liners. I would rather have a knife that has the handle scales, the blade, the pivot system, the deployment mechanism, and the pocket clip. That's how simple I'd want a knife. I don't want to have to worry about or think about other liners in there, of another piece of metal in there, being put under force. I know that the lock is there, that is it. I prefer frame locks, and I know that deployment speed is something that you have to forfeit for a frame lock, but I just trust a frame lock more. I'm not saying that I completely distrust a liner lock, because let's face it, there's not many places that liner can move. It can't, I mean, yes, it can move to disengage the blade, but it's held in by the other liner on the opposite side. And Spyderco with the Sage 1 did a very good job of skeletonizing the liners. Got a very nice macro shot there. And speaking of skeletonization, the Sage 1 doesn't weigh very much at all. It weighs, I did have it open, now I've lost it, but I think it weighs 91 grams off the top of my head. And the Sage 2 weighs 96 grams. So there's only 5 grams in it, folks. Only 5 grams. So you may think that no liners will, you know, you'll lose a lot of weight, but I think it's mainly because it's built out of titanium, which is still a light metal, but it is metal, and of course it would weigh more, than the carbon fibre and the G10 handle scales. And yes, I know that it's just a top weave of carbon fibre, and it has a G10 underlay. I know that it's 50-50. That doesn't really bother me that much, because if it was made out of entirely of carbon fibre, it would probably be a third more expensive, or maybe even double the price. But it's a very nice carbon fibre on the Sage 1. I really like the pattern. I really like the texture of it. Just feels, it's very, very nice. And it looks very eye-catching. And I love how they kept the pocket clip that kind of colour, a black in a way. So I do like the carbon fibre a lot, both for purchase, the feel, the texture, and because it's quite lightweight. The titanium, you don't have that texture, but you still have the titanium kind of texture, the smoothness of it, and it offers more friction, more purchase than you would think for such a smooth faced handle scale. However, I would probably have to give it to the Sage 1 just for the handle scales. I do like the titanium. I do like the how they've beveled around the whole of the handle scales. I really do like that. As you can see. But I would have to give the handle scales to the Sage 1. The steel, I think it's at a deadlock with that one. They both have the spear point blade shape, and they both have the, I believe, American made CPM S30V, which is excellent blade steel. See if I can show you a shot here. Excellent blade steel. A super fine edge. Very sharp. And they hold their edge a long time. Both of them do. So that's a bit of a deadlock for the blade steel, as they both have the same. Pocket clip. Again, bit of a deadlock. You can reverse both of the pocket clips to have them left side carry, and they're both tip up only, which is excellent. I like the finish on the carbon fibre one, and the titanium one is just your usual one. Ergonomics. I have to say I'd give it to the Sage 1 again. I don't know why. I can't really don't mean to use a pun, but put my finger on it. Literally, I can't put my finger on it. But I feel that my hand is more comfortable, probably because these scales are just very slightly thicker, and there's nothing pinching my finger there, unlike the Sage 2, where there's a possibility of that happening, and I just feel like there's just too much going on the handle, even though they're both exactly the same, more or less, for me to get a very, very comfortable grip. I feel a lot more comfortable with the finger in the choil there, whereas this one, it doesn't really matter which grip I have. So ergonomics, even though they are kind of the same, call me picky, but I prefer the Sage 1. Just very, very slightly. It's almost negligible. The aesthetics. I really like both of them. I really do. And it's very difficult to choose, but I would go for the carbon fibre, just because it has this very classy looking interwoven carbon fibre handle scale that is very eye-catching, and it's very, very classy. The Sage 2, on the other hand, yeah, it's got titanium, but how could somebody tell if that was just not a normal steel handle that had been sprayed that kind of colour, or been sprayed with a TI finish, a little bit like a cryo? And I know it, and I know we're splitting hairs here, but I think, for me anyway, the Sage 1 is the more eye catcher, is the eye catcher in comparing these two. Although the Sage 2 is still a nice looker. And finally, we're going to talk about the price. The price. The Sage 1 in the UK here is about £120, something like that. Sorry about that. The price of the Sage 1 is £120. That's this one. Price of the Sage 2 here is about £175. So you're paying £55 more for your handle scales to be made out of titanium with that integral lock. You're paying £55 more. But same steel, same shape, same blade shape, same pocket clip, but £55 for titanium. So it really boils down to, I mean, you could almost buy a sharp maker for that amount of money. You could certainly buy Spyderco UK PK for that money. And unless you want to collect all of them, to be honest, if there is one that you'd go for, that you'd have to go for if you only had the money, I'd go for the carbon fibre. I really would. I really like the titanium, but I have a few things in titanium, so it depends, you know, your titanium or carbon fibre stand. Which do you like more, carbon fibre or titanium? That is the real question. The carbon fibre is great to look at and has really nice texture, but the titanium can be nice to look at, but it doesn't really have much of a texture. Now, when people throw around the word of titanium, sometimes I get the feeling that they think it's some kind of magical steel, or quite rare, or something like that. It's not. It's actually, I think it's one of the third most abundant steels on the planet. It's very non-reactive, so you could swallow, well, not swallow a knife, but you could swallow something made out of titanium and it have no effect on the human body whatsoever. So bear that in mind. Well, not bear it in mind when you're purchasing a knife, but just bear that in mind, that it's not as magical as people may think. But I think that the reason why it is so expensive is it's the fashioning of the titanium, the fact that it's 3 times stronger than your normal steel, and to get it just right with the lock as well. One of the reasons why I'd suspect that Chris Reeves knives are so expensive as well. And it's also about the grade of titanium as well. I'm sure Spyderco, for a knife like this, use quite a high grade. Now remember that the higher the grade, the less susceptible to magnets it is. So if you've got something titanium and you put a magnet next to it and it locks on, it means that they've obviously mixed the titanium with just normal metal. But talking about that aside, I'd have to say that the overall winner, for me anyway, would be the Sage 1, just because it's cheaper. It's got the carbon fibre, which I like a lot, and you could buy another knife for the leftover. However, if you really like the Sage 2 and you don't leave home without it, it is of course an excellent pocket knife, and I'm pleased to have them both in my collection. But for this one, I've just got to give it to the Sage 1. Anyway, if you agree with me or you think I've been talking a load of rubbish, put it in the comments below. Even make a video response if you're absolutely in love with the titanium version. Put the reasons why. And if you have enjoyed this video, don't forget to finger bang that thumbs up like button as usual, and subscribe if you would like to see more content. That's all for me today. Thanks for watching again. Take care.